Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs of the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform for athletes and other alumni to network and connect with each other and tap into resources to help them with finance and health and career services. But this show is all about the athlete transition out of sport. It's such a major issue today from a mental health perspective, from a financial literacy perspective, and other areas as well. And we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their journey and transition out of sports ultimately to successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. And the whole idea is to teach and inspire athletes that there is life after sports. So excited today to have Matt Wisler on with us. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing great. So Matt is a former Major League Baseball player. He got drafted by the Padres, got drafted out of high school. And he is just literally had played last year, so he's transitioning out of sports this year. So it's great because we can talk just now being, where you're at. And he's one of the founders of Elite Performance Medical. So Matt, I always like to talk about how did, growing up playing sports, how did that shape you leading up through high school?
I would say a lot. I mean, obviously, there's a variety of different things that I did. Obviously, I did music and I did sports. So obviously, combining those things, I think, really helped shape me. I think with sports and everything, you kind of learn the work ethic side. I think my parents did a really good job with us too. That they did everything they could to show us the hard work. So I was out all the time practicing with my dad, and I fell in love with sports. So it wasn't just him. A lot of times it was me going to him, wanting to take ground balls, go hit in the cage. We had a hoop outside, shooting hoops. I used to throw balls off the garage for hours. So um, sports is a major part of my life. I loved it. I was outside all the time practicing. In the winter, I'd just sit there while I'm watching TV dribbling. So, it really impacted my life. I think it helped me a lot, shaped me in those ways, from the hard work perspective, and always wanting to kind of be busy and stay active. But understanding too that the work ethic that goes into it is, I think why obviously it translated later in my career to be successful. Obviously, too, when it comes to sports, you understand failure, you understand winning and losing, how to handle that. Basically understanding that, the only thing that you can really do is be prepared. And if you, obviously go out there and do your best, that if you lose, it's not the end of the world. I think that's the big thing that's, obviously misconstrued a little bit in today's youth sports is that, the winning aspects and stuff, obviously youth sports is great, but you're mostly there to get life lessons and have a lot of fun doing it. So yeah, I definitely think it impacted me later. It helped me to understand winning and losing and understand how to put some work in.
No, that's great. And so did you dream about being a professional athlete? And was it in baseball or was it maybe in another sport?
No, I always dreamed of being a professional baseball player. I would say that was obviously my first love. You start playing that at a much younger age. I mean, I'm playing basketball and stuff, playing kids soccer, but obviously baseball is the number one, obviously all the time. And I played multiple sports through eighth grade year with soccer, and I played golf. I didn't play like in tournament stuff like that, but basketball and baseball, and then baseball ended up being the one in high school along with basketball that I played. So I only played two sports in high school. The fall ended up being mostly for fall baseball, so it was kind of a time for me to work on basketball, obviously, but also getting especially in high school, obviously getting looked at and things like that. In fall baseball were kind of big. That's where a lot of scouts were. Um, Playing on those fall travel ball leagues. So I think that was a big thing for me, just doing the two sports. Obviously too, like I wasn't going to play football. And at that time I wasn't into as golf as I am now.
Yeah, I guess that's something you pick up along the way. I know. I guess part of your career is with the Braves, and people always talk about like Maddox and Glavine and Smoltz
Hmm.
being like big golfers.
Yeah, no, I talked to a lot of those guys, obviously, and Steve Avery and things, and the insane amount of golf that those guys played was just, I mean, they basically were playing 4 days a week, pitching on the fifth day, and like spring training, I talked to the guys about it because I talked to Steve Avery about it in the dugout one time during spring, and he was like, they would go out and play 36 every day, and I'm like, does that not get like old? Like I love golf, but like 36 a day for like 8 months, I'm like, that just sounds like way too much golf. I do love it, but not that much.
Yeah, and I guess as a pitcher, it's probably not as hard, right? I mean, you could do it because, like, as a hitter, I would imagine it might screw up your swing, even though it's a similar
Yeah.
swing.
Plus, you're playing 162 games, so like as a hitter, you wouldn't want to put that wear and tear on your body. There's definitely guys that go out there and play in the mornings, things like that. But as a starting pitcher too, it's super easy because it's part of your day. Relieving,
Right.
I wish I would have golfed a little bit more as a starter back when I was, but I was obviously super young, and I also didn't want to look bad in my first couple of years going out and golfing. But um, relieving it's a lot harder because you got to be ready each and every day. And some guys can do it, but I always felt like I didn't want to play golf and then all of a sudden have a bad game and then blame it on golf. So I just kind of stayed away from it.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about it's been a while since I've talked about this, but talk about social media. So you hear stories of athletes with maybe saying different things they shouldn't have said or whatever. So was there more, because you're more in the social media age now than maybe some of the older athletes, but did were there was there education around that, just kind of how to utilize it the right way? Even now with NIL, it's a big thing too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we did have like media training when I was young. It's mostly common sense, right? You can't drop, some of that stuff out there, and the stuff that people would put out there, and especially when they're drinking things like that. That's just when it's really dumb. So I like never get on social media when you're drinking. That would be the biggest advice because that's when the dumbest stuff comes out. But obviously, the biggest thing you got to learn with social media, and I got rid of my Twitter at one point. I still don't have it because I just got sick of all the tweets and the stuff that everyone was just kind of sitting there sending to you stuff. And obviously, every time you get up a run in the big leagues, even if it's like your first one in 20 innings, you're gonna have 10 guys commenting on your stuff in your DMs, telling you suck. So like a lot of it, you kind of have to put some of that stuff to the side. It's obviously you basically just expect that every time you get up a run pitching, or if you have a bad game hitting. So obviously with superstars and those guys, you have hundreds of thousands of followers. It's going to be, magnified 10 times full what I had. Obviously, being kind of a journeyman guy, nobody really, did much. But there's definitely some positives you can use with it. You can interact with fans with it. You can kind of show your personal side. I think you can use your brand too. I didn't have that many followers, but even 15 to 20,000, I was able to get some free stuff out of it. There's definitely, some roles you can do. I mean, look at all the people now. All these high, follower people. That's how you get a lot of free stuff. So if you want to build your brand, it's definitely a good way to do it. It's a way to make money in today's world. And there's definitely an opportunity, but there's also some pitfalls to it. And if you're not careful of those, then you will definitely go down the wrong way.
Yeah, no, and you gave some good advice there, because I think that's the thing you have to realize. Just be so. I mean, in the old school, you'd be talking about like never put things in writing that like what to say that your mother or your grandmother would approve of or something like that. So, you just hear. I remember one time I was talking to a guy, and he just said that older guy, not as old as me, but he played baseball in college, but like his thing was that they went out like the night before, and they partied a little bit, but the social media wasn't around then. So like it was a little bit different. It was more like you're going to be get wrath from the coaches, but but as far as like people knowing about it, it wasn't as prevalent. So let's talk about your transition out of high school, becoming a professional baseball player.
Yeah. So obviously, I got drafted back in 2011. I actually done a lot more, kind of research. I think a lot of this comes from my dad's side because he really likes to make sure that I'm well informed before I make a decision, and that was kind of the thing. I mean, obviously, I didn't really have any inkling of going professional until my junior year of high school, so it wasn't like I was this massive prospect kid coming up like some of these guys that are looked at since they were 14 to be the number one pick. So obviously, I didn't have any really true ambitions. I was just praying for college at that point in high school. And once I went to my summer year, it was my junior year of my summer, so like only had my senior year to make the decision because I went out, had a really good junior spring, and then I had a really good junior summer and fall. I gave up like no runs the entire year, and I went down to the East Coast Pro Showcase, had a really good 3 innings there, and kind of put myself on the radar for some teams based on that one performance. And then I had some more scouts watching me in the fall, so there was definitely some interest going into my senior year. And then that whole process, you talk to a lot of scouts. They come into your home, things like that, to kind of get to know you as a person. Get to know your family, kind of where you're from, things like that, so they can make a right decision on you. And so I basically went out there, and I thought for sure I could get drafted, but I didn't really know. And then I went out there my first game of senior year and stunk, and I lost all the people. Ended up being just two scouts, like pretty much that stayed. One was my fall ball coach, and then because he knew obviously the talent I had, and then there was basically just San Diego stayed around, and then all of a sudden towards the back end of my senior year, everything kind of started to click. My velo jumped about 3 miles an hour, and I started having some really good outings again. I basically came back to low 90s, but pitchability, young. I was skinny. I was a buck 70. So it was basically just we talked to a lot of people. We asked a lot of questions. Like, I actually went over to Fort Wayne and visited some players over there that I ended up playing with the next year, just to ask questions, what it was like, what's the, what entails, things like that. And we had a plan before I even went in, to move out there to spring training if that was going to be the thing, and kind of acclimate myself to pro ball, living on my own, getting underneath professional coaching, because I thank my parents a lot for that stuff, because a lot of kids don't do that. They just kind of get drafted without really a plan in place. And so for me, it was a lot easier. The one thing that sucked for 2011 was it was right before they moved, I don't know if it was a deadline or if it was like the whole thing when I was over slot. I had to wait until August. So I had a deal the day after the draft ready to go, and we couldn't because they had to sign off on over slot money back then, because I was drafted a little bit later than anticipated, just because we told no teams to draft me, because we basically wanted one number, and that was that. But I had to wait 2.5 months, so it's basically a wasted year, which sucked. And then I basically stunk my first pro outing in that August, and then went into instructs that year and was terrible. So like I was really nervous about that, and seeing all the first rounders and stuff. But I lived out in Arizona my first year at the complex, and just worked out there for the whole summer or the whole off season, and put a lot of strength on. And then, I made huge gains my first professional year, and I actually surpassed, most of the guys in my draft class. By the end of that year, I was, the kind of the ace of the staff in low A. And then, I transitioned the next year, and I was in double A my second year. So, the biggest thing for me was, I think I was more mentally ready for it. I knew that it wasn't going to be, I think a lot of high school kids, and I think it's definitely gotten a lot better in the last 10 years. High school kids are more prepared. I mean, these kids that come out now, they're built in these labs, and they're built with TrackMan, and their data and their stuff and their mechanics are so much cleaner now than they ever used to be. But, 10 years ago, you had to learn a lot more, kind of on your own. And for me, it was just a lot of that work, and me taking it more serious, knowing that it was a job, and this was my profession and my one shot. And so I think a lot of kids, they kind of took it for granted. They just thought they were better than everybody. They didn't put the work in. They were going out doing a lot of stuff they shouldn't be doing. And for me, I obviously kept it really professional since I was, 18 years old. So I think that really benefited me, more so than a lot of guys. And I think that's why, that I was more successful than most of the high school kids coming out of that class. Even though obviously there's, a lot of guys more successful than I was. For the vast majority, I was, I lasted a lot longer than a lot of those kids, because they just kind of hang out, party, and drink themselves out of the game, or just don't put the work in, because, obviously when you're in high school and you're better than everybody else, you don't need to work. But the game will humble you, pretty early on.
Yeah. And do you see is there a difference between, the baseball players being drafted out of high school versus the ones being drafted out of college? I mean, obviously at college you're older, so I mean, you're maybe a little more mature as far as maybe, body build wise, or possibly just, you're older, so you're, coming up. But do you see
Yeah, I think it's
differences
just
between the two?
it's the experience more. You face better hitting. Obviously, you go to college, and you have your first couple of years to kind of figure it out. You have 3 years to kind of get it. It's not like you go to college for 1 year. So some of these kids, right, they go in there, and instead of being a professional baseball, you go mess around a little bit in college. Competition's not as good, and I think some guys will falter their first year or two if they go in there without the mindset of work, and that game humbles them. But then they still have 2 more years to kind of turn it around before the draft. Because if you do that in pro ball, right, when you're 18, 19, and you go into pro ball and you fumble the bag, then you're out of the game, right, and you don't get another chance. But if you go to college, you have 3 years to kind of work through that stuff. And obviously a lot of people go to college, they party, things like that. So it gives you 3 years to kind of get through that stage before it's your actual career on the line. You get into college, you get under those strength coaches, so you get a lot stronger. You get some coaching. You're just facing better hitters, so you're kind of more better prepared. I mean, college, the best, especially if you're playing in high level college, you're basically already playing the low A, high A hitters. So you can move up the ranks a lot quicker, because you're basically at a double A level if you're a high round draft pick, coming out of college. So just that 3 years of maturity, I think, it helps a lot of guys to be a little bit more mature coming out, and not so. But like I said, today's age, like there's so many high school kids that come out, and I mean, these kids are in the big leagues in 2-3 years because they're just better than they used to be. They're better training. I mean, by the time they're 8 years old, they're getting biomechanics, and they're getting broken down training programs, throwing programs. Like, these kids are so much better than I've ever been, because they're just so much better, coaching and training and stuff since they're young.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I did some travel baseball coaching back in the day, and my son, and Yeah, they're the same back then. Even then, there was, he's the same age as you. There was a little bit younger, but there was, the coaches and stuff. And like you said, even now with like Drive Line and all these other ones you keep hearing about,
Yeah,
it
they're
makes a
everywhere
difference.
now.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about networking, connecting, and let's talk about the importance of doing it while you're still playing.
Yeah, obviously, connections, relationships make the world go around. I played on nine different organizations, eight different big league teams. So like obviously I had the luck of basically, it wasn't obviously always ideal, but I got to meet a ton of people around the game. I have a lot more connections than most people because like I played in so many different clubhouses. I met so many different GMs. I met so many different head coaches. So like, but obviously too, like when you're doing it, where you're from, things like that. Just meeting people, knowing people, because that's how you get jobs. After sports is basically through people my biggest worry coming out of retirement now is the fact that I'm a high school kid and I don't want to. I'm 31. I don't want to go spend 4 years in college. So, what connections? I was basically going to rely on the connections that I have in my life to help get me a job. Obviously, with my family, my wife's family friends, a lot of them own businesses. I know people that own businesses, things like that. So I could, try to get my foot in the door that way, or at least have a referral from one of those guys. Um, so having people that, like you, that will refer you, that understand who you are as a person, I think is definitely, it's pivotal, honestly, to get jobs. And I mean, you look at college kids, right? If when you're in college, some of your people are going to go on to own their own companies, be successful, or like their parents own companies. So there's always a way if you just, don't burn any bridges across your playing days, right? I think if you continue to just meet people and people know who you are, when it comes time to when you're done, it's a lot easier to get a job because, people know and trust who you are.
Yeah, and I know obviously just everything you just said there, you get it because I've talked to some agents that are just kind of like some of the players are, they're so zoned into the sport and they're not paying attention to what's going on around, like you just said. And so then when their playing days are over, they're expecting just to get that big job or whatever, and they haven't built those relationships because they did just put the time in. So it sounds like you did a great job along the way. And even when we talk about giving advice about networking, connecting, we talk about it can start as early as high school. I mean, you got your high school friends, like you said, their families, their parents. I mean, coaches. You just never know. So we definitely, I think it's important for athletes to do that, and especially while you're still playing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said,
So
relationships build life.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this is I probably got in the back of your head. Well, I was going, oh shoot, Rob's going to ask me this question because
Yeah,
it's
you're
like
good.
some of the recent podcasts. But give advice to Matt as a high school senior. Like if you can go back now, give advice to you.
Well, I mean, obviously, when it comes to pitching, I would have changed some different things throughout my career. But I don't really have a whole lot of regrets in my career when it comes to that. I feel like I did the things I needed to do from the workforce. If I could back then, I told myself to buy a bunch of Bitcoin so I could be retired right now. But otherwise, obviously, I think I was proud of the way I worked. But I would say if I had to change anything, I would go back to how I also live on the mental side. I think preparing myself mentally for the ups and downs. I don't think I was as prepared for the failure and the struggles that come with professional sports. That was some of my biggest pitfalls when I was a young kid coming up, the young prospect. Is like I said, I dealt with some failure my first year, but the next 2 years I really put myself on the map, and I didn't have as many failures. But then once I got to the big leagues in AAA, that was the first time that I really faced a lot of failure and doubts, and so preparing yourself more for the doubts that are going to come in your career because everyone's going to go through them. Doesn't matter who you are. There's going to be a day or a month or a year that you just get beat up. And so it's basically kind of preparing yourself to be able to handle that downfall. And that was probably the biggest takeaway from my career is, the first couple of years in the big leagues, I was really good at times, but when I was bad, I was really bad. And I lost. And a lot of that, I think, was more mental than physical. I think I had the physical tools. I just didn't have the mental toughness to grind it out.
Yeah, no, that's good advice there. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of challenges across the way, and just depending on like what stage you're in. So, when we talk about transition out of sports, is there education, coming from like let's say minor league baseball, major league baseball, just And I don't mean just like the 1 day workshops, but are there, different initiatives to kind of, run along with the athletes as they progress
Yeah, so they have
in their
the
transition?
Alumni Association. They do some different stuff, career development. But the problem with I don't know what exactly just the minor league alumni does because I was obviously I made it to the big leagues, so I was part of the MLB PAA, which is the Alumni Association, and they put on a lot of different stuff for guys, career development, things like that. They have some training, but you have to make it to the big leagues for that. So I can't speak on the minor league side just because I made it to the big leagues, so I have access to that stuff. Um, but they offer some career transitioning programs, but and the PA is starting to do a little bit more, but I think too like it's just not a priority obviously because they're really focused on the guys that are in the game, and that's really what they're catering to, right? They're the player association, they're not the retirement association. So the alumni association was pretty much built for that. That was their whole point, was to help guys transition, and they do a pretty good job. They work with the PA to get some stuff out there. I know that. So there are some access things. I think the biggest thing is you really have to take it upon yourself to do it because the PA is not going to sit there and promote this stuff and do all that stuff because they're worrying about the current guys. So if you want to start preparing for your career at the end, then you need to start doing that on yourself and do it too before you think that your career is over because
Yeah.
most of the time your career is ending a lot quicker than not. So like I mean, I thought I could pitch a couple more years. So I hadn't gone to any of the conferences in the off season and things like that to really prepare myself for retirement. It happened, a year or two quicker than I anticipated, or a couple years quicker than I anticipated. So, even at the peak of your career, to take some stuff and start to prep yourself for, it could happen at any time. You're an injury away from being done and stuck. So, doing that stuff just kind of throughout your career, I think would really help benefit guys.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's the key. Just keep doing it instead of just waiting until the end. So, you kind of brought up the Alumni Association. Talk a little about alumni engagement. And so, when you're playing, are there, like former players coming back and maybe almost like mentoring, aside from being coaches? But I mean, are there players that come back and again, not just for that golf tournament, but they're coming back and interacting with other players from the team?
Yeah, every team has their I don't even know how would I call this, like special assistants to the GMs type players, like the superstars, the like the team Hall of Famers, like they bring them around because they like having those guys around. Like with the Braves, I mean, you had Glavine, you had Chipper, you had all these guys that would come back and speak to guys, talk to guys, work with young guys to help them. So every team brings back their old veteran guys. I know like San Diego had Hoffman all the time, was around. He was like a coordinator guy. He would go down to the minor leagues and talk to guys. So they would always bring back the really successful guys just to help kind of mentor young guys. But it wasn't, again, this wasn't like, transitioning type stuff. This is while you're playing. So there's not really a focus on, I mean, if you start thinking about too much about retirement, then you're really just going to lose focus on what you're doing. So everything you do is predicated towards the sport, right? But in the off season, that's where I would say you could start prepping and doing some stuff in the prep work for in your off seasons. I wouldn't focus too much on retirement when you're playing because that's just obviously not good.
Right.
But I would say in the off season, you can like there's some programs out there that you can start to kind of get in touch with and kind of mentally prepare yourself. And it also might give you a little bit more peace of mind when you're playing to know that I do have a plan in place when this is over and I don't have to stress so much and just go out there and really focus on the sport.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, you're pretty much giving advice all along the way here because I always talk about like, I guess now that you're, and you just hit on a bunch, but to kind of sum it up, maybe give some words of advice to athletes that are getting ready to transition, whether at a sport, whether it's college, professionally. What advice, big picture, would you give to them?
Yeah, I would say it's not easy. A lot of guys lose their identity. I think the biggest thing too is don't forget that you're a person first. I think a lot of guys get wrapped up in the fact that they're an athlete. When like I said, when I was going through my failures early in my career, I basically thought of myself as a failure because I failed at my sport. And I had an older teammate always telling me, like, look, you're not a failure. It's just you failed at what you do. Like you're an athlete. It's just what you do. So like I've always kind of had that mindset about myself where I can kind of separate, I'm not a failure, but sometimes you feel like a failure if you start failing in your sport because everyone views you as an athlete. So you have to remember, you're a person. You were just an athlete. That doesn't mean when your career stops, your life's not over. There's a lot more fun stuff out there. There's a lot of different things. Obviously, life can be a lot more fun in the terms of your home. You're around your family and friends a lot more. Like for me, it's been nice to not have to travel so much. Obviously, I was always more busy than most people in my off seasons, but waking up in my bed 300 days a year is insane to me. And so like there's a lot of different things out there. There's a lot of cool opportunities outside of sports. I think the one thing too is I always wanted to succeed outside of baseball to show that I could succeed, not just in one realm of life, but also as an athlete, but also as a business person. I want to grow myself in so many different facets. I think some people, they don't really have a whole lot of hobbies and stuff outside the sport. That's where I think guys really get lost, is like they basically only do baseball. That's all they know. That's all they care about. They have no outside hobbies. So, even when you're playing, if you can find some different things you're interested in, I think that will make life a lot easier when you transition. Because if you go from just knowing and only doing one thing and never doing anything but that sport, it's going to make it really hard. So just try and find some outside experiences that you enjoy, things, hobbies, something to get you outside, and kind of figure out what in life besides your sport makes you happy and something you can get away to. And then that way, when you retire, you at least have something you can kind of latch on to.
And so everything to all the athletes out there, everything Matt just said, I mean, we talk about that all the time and you hit on the loss of identity because a lot of people, identify themselves as a sport. You're right. And it just, it's amazing. I talk about this all the time, but it's such great, I call them nuggets, but great advice and nuggets that athletes like Matt are sharing here. And it can make a positive impact on a lot of people. So let's fast forward now. So now you're been brought on to this team of Elite Performance Medical. Talk about some of the different things that you're doing there and how you're helping athletes.
Yeah, so obviously myself was going through the transition. I hadn't 100%, retired at this point. I kind of was teetering on the 90%. I'd started to lose motivation because I couldn't get a job. And, I felt that I deserved one this year after, the last couple of years in the big leagues that I had. But, it's just sports, right? And they move on, pretty quickly from you. So it was kind of a thing where I was teetering on the brink of it. And then this opportunity came up to me from a guy from my hometown area that I grew up with. I knew I competed against him in high school. So I've known him for 25 years, Telly Fricky, and I knew he was in the med device world. And so I wanted to talk to him about med device. He came to me with a real estate deal that he was doing. And so we got to talking about that. And then we just got talking, and I was telling him kind of my situation and that I was looking about getting into med device world. And then he offered me a job to help them do what they were doing, which is basically develop and place ex-athletes in the med device sales world. So I was like, okay. So I thought about it, texted him. I was like, are you actually serious about this? And he said, yeah. So that Monday, we had a conversation on Friday. I texted my agent that Monday that, hey, I'm done. Like, this is a really cool venture. I was, praying for a sign of like, do I continue playing? Do I not? Like, I was just at a loss at that point. And I think this was kind of my answer to that prayer. And so I moved on to it. And basically what the whole concept is to help guys in my situation where you kind of just, you have a ton of options out there, but you don't really know how to get into it. I wanted to get in the med device world, but I don't know how. I don't know anything about it. I at least have some friends and stuff that are in it and a lot of family in the medical world. But what we're going to do is basically run you through a 6-week course to develop you and train you a little bit in, what made Telly successful. He went the independent route, which is a little bit different than W-2, but if you can do the independent, then W-2 is much easier. It's a little bit of clinical stuff, but it's a lot of the stuff that we're going to do is more focused on, being an actual salesman and what it means to be a medical device rep and how to sell and how to navigate hospitals and all these different facets that make you successful in that field. We're going to kind of condense it into a 6-week training course that, you have an idea of what you're doing when you get into the role. And also with the connections that Telly had from being so successful in the field, we believe we can get guys placed in this at a very high rate, if not 100% rate, because of the connections. And people love athletes, but people don't have access to athletes. And we want to provide, that basically that route who athletes that want to come through us and put the work in. And the people that are hiring from us will understand that they're getting a much higher quality person in the terms of, they're dedicated in the workforce and they're willing to put the work in, because that's what athletes can bring to the table. So, we've heard a lot of good things from the people on the hiring side, the employer side. They're looking for quality workers. They're having a tough time right now finding those good quality workers. And we believe athletes can be that answer to that. And, if we can give them a little bit of training up front, they should just be better off. And for the athletes, it'll help them. Hopefully, we believe will help them become more successful because they're going to have an understanding what it entails, and they don't go in there and are super overwhelmed early on. We'll give them a community. Every athlete that comes through the course, we want to come back and help the people behind them. So, in sports, and we talk about to our athletes all the time. It's like you go from sports, you have your agent, trainers, strength coaches, special people, your outside, your personal trainers that are helping you. All of a sudden, you're done and you have nobody. We want to be that somebody where we can offer you support, we can offer mentorship, we can offer so many different things to these guys that outside of this, there's not a community like this for other athletes, and we want to provide that community aspect feel where you're going through it together with different peers, and then you also have mentors and people that are going to help you along the way.
It sounds like a great program. And so you said it's a 6 week. So is it something that do you run like more than one 6 week course at a time, where it could be like or is it just like when you start, it's a 6 week? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so it's going to be, I think what we decided on for now, and obviously we're a new company, right? We're 3 months into this. So we're listening to outside advice. We're trying to make sure that we're doing everything right by the med device people, but also by the athletes. And I think as of right now, we're offering, we're going to offer one course this year, just because it's the first initial course, prove the model and showcase all that stuff. And then in 2025, the goal is to have 3 classes, one early in the year, one springtime, like a couple of weeks after that one, have a next class. But then, during the summer months when it's kind of slow hiring period, we'll probably stay away from it. And then, obviously med device sales gets crazy around the holidays because that's when everyone hits their deductibles and everyone gets the surgeries. So, we'll have another class in the fall leading into that. So we want to offer athletes some options on when they do it, because like we talked about before, it's like you can get released at any time. And if you have nothing prepared, we want to offer a little bit of that, leniency where you have within a couple of months, you could be in with us.
That's great. And I said, last question is talk about the athlete skill set, the DNA, and kind of like what you're talking about now about medical device sales. I mean, a lot of people talk about athletes and sales. Just kind of give a couple words on that of how that translates into the business world.
Yeah, so we believe a lot of the same qualities that it takes for us to be successful, right? So as an athlete, you have to be hardworking, you have to be dedicated, you have to be super prepared, right? Like we basically, we play 160 games, but every day still, it's like I'm there at 1:00, I'm taking care of my body, I'm getting done for that. And for a reliever too, like I'm playing catch, treatment, lifting, eating correctly, doing all the stuff that I do for, one inning, right? So like I get 60 innings a year out of, the thousands of innings in a year. So you're basically 90% work for the 1% game. And that's similar in the fact of, think about NFL or like NBA, like how much, or WNBA, like you're practicing so much for that one game. So there's so much work that goes in beforehand to make sure that you're ready, you're prepared. We think it's the same thing when it comes to the med device world. It's all the, like getting prepared, taking trays to and from hospitals. It's putting the groundwork, getting to know your surgeons, doing research on your surgeons so you can kind of talk to them more, find connections with them. There's so many different things that you can do to prepare yourself. And we just believe the qualities of an athlete translate really well to sales. And then obviously you're an athlete, you have a brand. To be successful, people know that it took a lot of work and effort. So they understand that translates right away. And that's why, athletes are coveted in the sales world, not just only in med device sales, but in all different aspects of sales. And, same with like military, things like that. They understand that there's teamwork. You're good people, you're resilient, you deal with failure at a higher level than most people. So, we just think it all translates really well to this field. And obviously, we're only focusing on one specific field. There's obviously 1,000 different sales jobs out there, but we're focusing on the med device field because also we believe that that's a really fun job because it provides a lot of purpose in the fact you're not sitting behind a desk making cold calls. You're actually out. You're working with really high level people, really high educated people when it comes to surgeons and OR staffs. And like a lot of athletes like myself, like I can't sit behind a desk. I don't mind doing this types of work. I like podcasting, stuff like that. Super easy. But like if I had to crunch numbers or just cold call people and get rejected, I'm like, after a week, I'd quit. So this is a really fun thing where it's a lot of work and it's a lot of traveling, but you're out and about, you're not behind a desk, you're getting to work with high level people. You're part of a team, but also it's your individual goals that you're hitting. So a lot of that med device field we think translates to kind of your sports as well.
Yeah, so unbelievable there. Just everybody listening. Again, there's that athlete skill set. People want to hire you. Like you said, different types of sales positions, and I think you just have to go for it. And you have to plan along the way, and don't be afraid. And again, like Matt talked about earlier, it's the next chapter. So, it's the game of life, right? It's a new game that you're getting ready to play. There's a new playbook, or, whatever it might be, depending on what the sport is, but you just need to take advantage. So how do people find you, and how do they find Elite Performance Medical?
You can follow me on Instagram, honestly, or you can follow my LinkedIn. I think it's just Matthew Wisler or Matt Wisler. You'll see me in a Tigers hat on my LinkedIn. I'll eventually change that. But you can follow that. You can follow Elite Performance Medical on LinkedIn. We have Instagram. I think we have all the major. My wife, she's like a social media marketing too, so she's helped build that brand. We have a website, teamepm.com, where there's like some information on that. They can then submit a form for an athlete or even a distributor part. If somebody works for a company that wants to hire athletes, you can get access both different ways. That'll come to my email, and we'll set up an intro call and kind of go over everything in more detail than this, and just kind of explain what we can do for you. And if you want to move forward, then we'll sign you up for classes.
Yeah, that sounds great, and we'll put that in the show notes, and give that information. You can find us at alumnidirect.com. This podcast is on our Alumni Direct YouTube channel, as well as across all the podcast networks, and you can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and X and Instagram. And this is such an important topic, and we really appreciate your time, Matt, today, and all the other athletes. I mean, just such great advice, and we really want to push it out. You could also find the podcast on esports, epreneur.com. I probably said this. Yeah, I say that all the time, and now I mess it up myself. Sportsepreneur.com for all you folks out there, our friends there. There's got about 15 or 16 different podcasts there. But anyway, this has been another great episode. Again, Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, pleasure having on.
Yep, you're welcome.